what you're trying to create is a situation where you get paid instantaneously for the work you're doing. But yet the systems that we set up behind it are setting you up for a 90-day pay cycle. Well, hello and welcome to another guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and I'm excited about this conversation. And like I told my guest in the green room, I'm excited about the solution, and I'm, I don't know, mortified by the problem. Basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be having a conversation around fixing your AR, fixing your accounts receivable. And a lot of our listeners have this challenge. And what's interesting is that I think of AR as, uncollectible invoices. When you go to a client, you send them an invoice and they don't pay it. And then the question is like, how did you get into this problem in the first place, right? Did you not take a retainer? Was the retainer not enough to pay their invoices? Did you not have a good retainer replenishment process in place? If you're flat fee, right? Like you did flat fee, you put them on payments. Did you continue work even though they didn't pay at the milestone they were supposed to? Like, how is there even a breakdown where there is accounts receivable that needs to be collected? And what's interesting is that Matt, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, he basically said, well, look, I mean, AR, like collecting retainers is still AR, right? Whether it's yours or not is irrelevant. It's still the action of getting somebody to give you money that's theirs that you need to have on your side of the table. So I really love that reframe of what accounts receivable is. But at the end of the day, we're gonna jump into how big of a problem is this? How do we solve it? What needs to be done at the firm? What needs and what options does the firm have when you don't have the team in place, you don't have the professionals in place, like you don't have the expertise to figure out how to get people to make those payments, and nobody wants to work for free. It's really bad feeling. As a matter of fact, I had a $2 million revenue family law firm that I worked with early on at the beginning stages of me working with law firm owners. And this particular firm was making a profit of $50,000 on $2 million in revenue. That's insane when you think about it. Like you're really busting your hump. You have multiple attorneys on staff. You're paying a crap load for marketing, and you're not making money, right? Like $50,000, like you sneeze and you're losing money, right? You make one decision the wrong way or one thing happens. When we dove into it, that firm had $750,000 of accounts receivable uncollected. Imagine what a difference in that law firm owner's life that $750,000 would have made. So AR is a problem. It is the death knell in a firm. Like it is the antithesis to growth and success. And this podcast is called Profit with Law. You can't figure out how to get paid, you ain't going to be making a profit, not a profit that you'd like to talk about. So we want you to be making 30 to 50% profit margins. In order to get that, it takes getting paid for the work that you're doing. So I'm excited to jump into this conversation with Matt Darner. Matt Darner is the co-founder and VP of Business Development at Collbox. That's Collbox, C-O-L-L, like collection box, COLLBOX.co. Co-founder of Collbox, which is a service that takes over the hassle of chasing the past due invoices for law firms. Matt has seen how badly law firms struggle to get paid for their work, and his passion is helping them put their accounts receivable operations on autopilot so they can focus on doing what they do best without sacrificing the financial health of their firm in the process. Matt, welcome to the Profit with Law podcast. Happy to have you here today.
I appreciate it, Moshe. Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
My pleasure.
Excited to talk about what everyone loves to talk about, which is accounts receivable. Every law firm's favorite topic, right?
Exactly. I mean, we get mail all the time asking us, hey, can we spend more time talking about AR? No, I'm just kidding. We get no such requests. But then again, we don't get any requests. Law firm owners, not a very vocal group as a listener base of the podcast. But if you do have a request or want to communicate with our team, info@dreambuilderfinancial.com will be in the show notes. send us an email. Well, we will reply to it. Matt, people don't know who Matt Darner is. Give us the backstory. How in the world did you end up in AR with Collbox? With law firms? Like, what give us the stepping stones of how you got here. Uh, Paint the picture of who Matt is, and then we'll jump into a conversation.
Cool, cool. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I think I can speak for most people in that industry where it's not necessarily, where I plan to end up. I have an art degree. No, that's true. But I've actually always worked with businesses that I think have struggled with automation and technology. I've worked with higher ed, medical, law firms, small businesses, and particularly small law firms, over the last several years of my career. But we've been doing this since 2015. I'm very fortunate to have an engineer as a best friend and a co-founder here at Callbox. So we've worked at a few technology companies together, sort of a he builds it, I sell it sort of relationship over almost 20 years now. But we've been at this for quite a while. We started really a lot wider, as I was telling you before we kicked off. We were starting with helping small businesses of all shapes and sizes. We're talking plumbers, HVAC companies, and I just have been knee deep in, kind of the AR aging reports of thousands of businesses at this point, working with a lot of accounting professionals, a lot of great, fractional teams like yours, and just really helping businesses understand their finances, right? We can't evolve our business until we understand how money is flowing through it, right? That's something so critical, but I think it's not what no one went to law school to learn, a P&L, right? Or or something like that, or kind of understanding your financials and never mind your profit margins at the end of the day. But been helping businesses for a lot of years. In the last 2 to 3 years, really focused in on law firms. For me, it's such an interesting space because these, the law firm owners I've gotten to work with are some of the kindest, biggest hearted people who do so much work for their clients. They do amazing work for their clients. But despite, even the reputations they speak of themselves as being, oh, we're so tough, we're so hard, are some of the last people to ask for the money that they're owed for the hard work that they do, right? And once I realized, several years ago that I think that law firms really needed our help. I like working with business owners who understand their value, but maybe need a little bit of help, right? And kind of getting that unlock, getting those processes in place. I know you do too, right? This is why we're so similar. And I just like rolling up my sleeves and working on the business alongside them and really trying to be a partner rather than just another vendor. So I've had a lot of fun working with law firm owners over the last few years. And yeah, look, as we talked about before we kicked off, it is not uncommon for me, when consulting with clients to hear that they've got, several hundred thousand, sometimes well over $1 million in AR. Like, so there, for me, what keeps me up or keeps me up at night, but wakes me up in the morning, I guess, is there's good work to be done there, right? So, yeah, I guess that's the long and short of it.
Love it, Matt. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Let's start off by talking about what is the actual problem? Like, how big is this problem? What does the data tell us? For one thing, I know that certain types of firms, like contingency-based firms, where you're getting the payouts going into trust and then you're taking a piece of it before the client gets it, you don't have an AR problem, right? So we're talking about our hourly billable firms. We're talking about our firms that have you take a retainer, you pull from the retainer, and then something happens along the way, and somehow the retainer is used up. You continue to do work, or you work in a system where you can't exit the case. You're stuck, and the retainer doesn't get replenished, or you don't get paid, and you have to continue to serve that client, even though you have a collections issue. And then I guess even flat fee based firms, anybody who's doing any sort of payment plans for their clients when they come on, or splitting the payment into pieces, at some point you have to ask for that next payment. I remember a Clio Legal Trends report recently, maybe in 2022 or 2023, where they did an interesting study and they talked about discounting, the effect of discounting for law firms. And I think that the overall AR problem is it's pretty obvious, right? And people feel it. But I think there's an underlying problem that happens um, in the collections process, which is when you're interacting with your clients and you're asking for money, they start questioning every line item on the invoice, right? And they're
Yeah.
negotiating for you to take items off. And what ends up happening is that either because you feel bad or because they actually do have a point in some cases, right?
Sure.
You start crossing items off the invoice. And what ends up happening is they did a study. They were like, they basically said, can we determine that is it better to do discount to charge more and do discounting or to charge a lower rate? And they
Mm,
basically came out and they said it's actually better to just charge a lower rate and not discount, right?
mm, mhm,
Because you're basically getting people to say no to you because you're charging too much on the front end,
right,
when in the end you're charging less anyway.
right.
So the
Kind
reality
of
is that
ending up in the same place, right? Why
right.
not shortcut the thing? Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that there's a power and a value it taking the attorney and or the business owner out of the billing process, right?
I oh, yeah, just from your lips to God's ears, my friend. No, no, I think that's sort of in so many ways. I have a lot of thoughts about this, right? I think that when you're so emotionally invested in the work because you're doing the work, period, right? Like you attorney, you are the service provider, right? You are the one providing this very important service, right? Whatever your practice area, they came to you for your expertise. But unfortunately, what happens is you get too emotionally invested. I do this. I do this talk a lot. The most recently, I think in April, I did a presentation for the ALA, right? So these are for your administrator folk, your operations staff, right, through that organization. And I do this slide on like the webinars when I do CLE for this. Um, Called the usual suspects, right? And the number one bullet on that slide every single time is the relationship excuse, right? And what happens is, oh, it's my client. I don't want to like my reputation. I got this relationship. I don't want to like hurt that relationship. I have relationship. And that's fine. That's true. I'm not in actually any way trying to down on that because it is very much a relationship driven business. That's no question, but that all the more reason to separate yourself from that when we talk about the administration side of the business of the firm, right? The finances. So I think everything from intake to the initial, retainer deposit, the initial payment there, any replenishment requests, if that's appropriate for your business, certainly any follow up on past due bills, right? All needs to be executed by someone, in my opinion, my strong opinion, with the training for that, right? Trained in accounts receivable. We'll talk more about that later because that's hard to come by in a small firm when everybody has to wear a lot of hats. But I think is not the service provider, right? Who is not emotionally invested in the relationship, the case. I'm talking to you, family law. I work with a ton of family law clients. I love you guys, but it's an emotional time. Almost no one's going to a family law attorney, right? Or certainly those that specialize in divorce when things are going great, right? There's a highly charged emotional scenario. You got to separate yourself from it. I have this thing I kind of half jokingly call, but it's not that much of a joke, called the service provider death spiral.
Mhm.
And why I call it that is you're the service provider and you're reaching out to your clients because you need to do great work for the case, right? You want to do great work for them. But when you also wear the hat of bill collector, right? People dodge bill collectors, and for any number of reasons. It's not always maliciousness or they're bad people who are trying to defraud you or scam you or not pay for the work you're giving them. Sometimes they're just hard up. I don't know, their cat just died, or they're falling on hard times, right? Something difficult's happened. I just can't deal with this right now. But people dodge bill collectors. But when you are one and the same as service provider and bill collector, they'll start dodging your calls. Then you're going to have a harder time providing a great service because the client's not going to be as responsive as they once were, right? And then they actually will start to justify not paying you. It's almost like you said a little bit earlier. They're going to have you start scratching items off. There's actually a resentment that builds up. Uh, and then it just spirals out of control, right? Then you find yourself you know, not being able to justify your bills. The whole thing goes sideways, I think. So it's really, really important to separate yourself from that. You have to emotionally separate, but I think literally don't talk finances. Think about the last time you went to a doctor's office, right? I've done this a million times. I'm cost conscious like everybody else. I'm going in, they want to do a procedure. I need X, Y, and Z. Well, how much is that going to cost? What does your doctor usually tell you, right? I'm not really familiar with that part, right? Like that's the other team. I know we all get a little bit frustrated by that, but it keeps them focused on the medicine, right? You have to stay focused on practicing law. I'm a huge proponent of separating that.
Yeah. So if you have somebody else taking care of the billing cycle and collecting from the client, what is the reason that we get into these messy issues with AR? Like, is it just human nature that they're not going to pay? I mean, they're they're not paying their cable bill, right? Like,
Right.
uh, is it poor process because we're not on auto pay? Like, what's happening with the lawyer that's different than anything else, like their rent or their cable bill or their I mean their car payment? Like, there's so many other things they're making payments on that are
Right.
happening and are and this payment's not. What's really happening behind the scenes there?
Yeah, I think there's a few there's several things we could talk about. I think to the point of like cable bill, your car, your rent, there are consequences, right? Like we know what happens if we don't pay those things. We lose access to that thing. So I think one thing I coach a lot of attorneys on and operations staff on is you have to know your leverage, right? You brought this up at the top of the recording. In some cases, it's going to be, or some practice areas, it's going to be really hard, if not impossible, to withdraw from a case for non-payment. In many cases, like family law, and I know this will vary by, jurisdiction and bar rules and things like that, but there is a time when you can file a motion to withdraw and you can get out of that case. But it's not an infinite window, right? And you have to usually do that well before a certain milestone within the natural arc of that case. So something a lot of my family law clients tell me, and we work on all the time, is what are your leverage points? So when can you cut off the cable, right? When can you evict, right? I hate to say it like that, but it is the case. When are you going to stop providing services as such that they lose the benefits that you're providing them? So knowing your leverage and mapping that out really in parallel to what I consider, writing down your accounts receivable policy. When are you going to follow up? When, it actually goes even further back to like in your intake and in your sales process, if you like, setting expectations around cost. When are we going how much retainer are we going to take? When and how is that going to be replenished? Then if things do go past due, how often are we going to reach out? When are we going to send emails? When are we going to make phone calls? I know that all feels overwhelming, but it's not that complicated. You just need to map it out, right? What am I going to do? AR functions on a timeline. It's all about a time horizon, right? So at 5 days past due, how am I going to behave differently than 45 days past due? And I can tell you a lot of basic and kind of obvious ways to work in that, but each practice area is going to be different. Family law is going to have a very different timeline, right? Than kind of general or corporate counsel or transactional, folks and things like that. So, there's some kind of one size fits most sort of things that need to be in almost everybody's accounts receivable policy. And then there really needs to be a few obviously practice area specific things. But another thing, you mentioned the Clio report. The Clio legal trends report is even if you're not on Clio, it's a fantastic report filled with a ton of data, right? I think they poll usually around 1,000 law firms every time they go and build one of
I
these
think it's
things. So
2000 actually.
is it more? Wow. Okay. So I
Yeah.
mean, like they had me at 1,000, and so it's a ton of data, and it's not necessarily about the tool. It's about how representative is the data, which is important. So what else is going wrong process wise? I think is quite frankly, how long it takes you to get the bill out the door. So last year, I was at CleoCon in Nashville. It was our first CleoCon. It was a really exciting time for us. We had been nominated as one of the best new apps. And CleoCon's a big show. Like that's a lot going on, and it's well produced. So, but then they announced that term lockup, right? I know you're familiar with this, Moshe, but for those that aren't, lockup is a representation of how long effectively it takes you to get paid for your work. We're talking from time tracked ultimately all the way through to getting paid for that work. And they broke it up in two smart ways, right? Two smart pieces, realization lockup and collections lockup. And even though my world as an AR guy and our world is very much focused on collections lockup, our golden stat is reducing that by 40% on average. Like that's a metric we align very closely with. But as the old saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? Like the realization lockup stat, I kind of have this hand. This is the 2023 number. They've updated it since I burned this into my brain. But the median firm was taking 38 days to get their bills out the door. So well over a month to issue that bill. Um, and then it was a median of 45 days, right, to get paid that
Yeah, it's like
collection.
it was like 97 days total, right?
The total, yeah, we're talking over a quarter, right? To from now, all the work you're kicking, you're busting your hump, right? As you said earlier, right now, Imagine getting paid for that in a quarter. No one goes into it thinking that way, but that's what the data shows. That's statistically likely to happen to you, right, listener? And so that's why we got to think through all the ways we can fix this. And one of the ways is just getting tighter on the billing. Something that, when people come on board, at our company at Callbox, we won't take people who don't have a kind of a regimented billing process, because the reason is it's garbage in, garbage out. You can't collect on something if you don't believe it's accurate, right? Because the last thing you want to do is be chasing clients for bills and say, oh, well, it looks like here you owe $1,000, and it's 95 days past due, and they're like, I paid that 2 months ago. What are you talking about, right? So cleanliness is really important for that. So yeah, getting the bills out the door. And then for my part, where what I talk a lot about is just having a regimented process of what are we going to do if slash when it gets past due, with every intention of preventing that from happening in the first place, right? We can
Yeah.
unpack a
So,
lot more of those things. So
so Matt, before we even talk about past due, I want to come back to this.
yeah,
I just want to focus for a minute or two on what you've already shared. What is the initial lockup called? It's the
realization lockup. So how long
realization
does it
lockup.
take to get out the door?
I'm not,
So
wasn't familiar with the term. I love it. Um, I have for years here on the podcast, in my coaching program, been telling small firm owners, don't try to act like the big boys. Okay. People who have multi-million dollar firms and they do an invoice cycle once a month, they can do that if they want, right? Like they have the cash flow, they're not hurting for every next dollar. They can choose to do that once a month. The reality is that from your client's perspective, it doesn't feel good to get a bill at the end of the month that has the whole month and they had no idea what was accruing that entire time. Okay.
the
From your
sticker shock is very
perspective,
real.
from your perspective, you just worked for 4 weeks for free until you get paid, right? Like, why would you not want to get paid faster? I mean, anybody else who does any other work, I mean, unless you're talking about a big project and then we're talking about flat fees, right? But if anybody else is charging you by the hour, they're gonna take the money from you every time that they spend an hour, right? They're not gonna do this billing cycle once a week, once a month. So I would encourage you to get away from that model as quickly and as fast as you can. Now, I understand the money's in trust, and you drive yourself nuts if you were figuring out how much to transfer from trust every single day. Daily's probably a little bit over the top, but it's not unheard of, right? Like it's not impossible to do that. But go to weekly. Instead of monthly, go to weekly. Use the same process. Just going to go into my system and generate invoices for all the time spent. I'm going to review the time entries and make sure, like, if something I don't think should be billable, I'll take it off. But whatever you do once a month, do it once a week instead. Here's what's going to happen. What's going to happen is number one, your clients are going to be happier. First of all, they're going to remember what happened this week, right? At the end of the month, they may not remember what happened at the beginning of the month. So they may start asking questions. Hey, I don't remember being on the phone for you for 20 minutes. Well, let's go to the call logs and let's find, like,
Right, then
you
you have to
don't need to
prove
do
your
that. If they
worth,
spoke to
right?
you on Monday and they get an
That's
invoice
right.
Friday, they know they spoke to you on Monday, right?
Yeah.
So I think that just the recency of the activity is going to be more real to them, and it's going to eliminate a lot of those conversations where they're looking to discount the invoice. Also, it feels better to them when they get a $500 invoice instead of a $2,000 invoice. They're less likely to be hounding you to discount it when it's a smaller dollar amount. So you're solving a lot of problems by doing it. And then the big one is you're much more in tune to how much is left in retainer, because without invoicing, it's kind of theoretical, right? Like I know that they have a bank of X amount of hours, but I got to have a process to stay on top of that. Well, if you're not good at that, then invoice once a week. So at least if you ended up blowing through the retainer, it was only by whatever number of hours there are in a week and not by whatever hours there are in a month.
Yeah.
And
You get out
and
of control on that side of things too. And yeah, absolutely. Certainly if
correct.
you've got court appearances, any type of meeting, mediation, court appearance, yeah, it gets out of control, it gets upside down really, really quickly,
Right.
right?
It adds up very quickly. And if you don't have a good system or process in place to catch that, then you end up with the retainer being used up, you having done hours, and now you've got an AR problem. Now, maybe not, maybe they pay it. But even so, why would you want to hold out and not have that cash in the door that week
You're
instead of
betting, right?
waiting
You're
for the end of
betting
the
on
month.
it. You're betting on it working out well, right? Versus like just having a process to ensure that it works out well. You're touching on something that I like bringing up a lot that I don't know if everyone knows about. It's a little bit esoteric, but I think it might have been featured in one of the um, legal trends reports too. But so there's this concept, right? I think it's from the 30s, right? So J. Thunberg was a lawyer. There's this study called the basically the Thunberg gratitude curve, right? And it basically it kind of it's like a normal distribution curve of like essentially like how grateful they are, right, for the work you're doing. And it just really talks to that recency bias that you were bringing up, Moshe, because the further away the client gets from the work you've done for them, certainly if it's like amazing breakthrough in the case and you've just crushed it, there's been an amazing victory, that's incredible, that's even more so. But even on the little things like you're saying, kind of the weekend, day in day out, week in week out, the further away the client gets from it, the more that their gratitude tends to fall off. And so it's called the Thunberg gratitude curve. But I encourage people to look that up because it really kind of tells you what you need to know about like how far away from the value you're driving, how unfortunately, the recency bias is real, and then that ties directly into the likelihood of payment for that service. So,
Yeah, and
couple that with
honestly,
yeah,
Matt, it's not even just remembering what was done, but things have happened since then.
right,
Case in point, I had an exterminator come for an ant problem yesterday. He walked in the door, he sprayed in a few areas, sprayed around the perimeter of the house, asked me for $225 and he left, right?
right,
I paid him. Imagine if he had said, "Okay, I'm going to mail you a bill." Well, last night we had an army of ants marching up through a hole in the upstairs bathroom because they were all escaping whatever poison was put down.
right,
And here they are. We've got this mass exodus going on in the upstairs of the bathroom. I wouldn't have been so quick to send them the $225 because I
yeah,
felt like the job wasn't done.
that's right.
Imagine
And then you get
if,
to be the arbiter of like who deserves to get paid and when and how and deserves is the key there, right? I think that's absolutely right.
yeah, so you spend 4 hours on a case. The client knows you spent 4 hours. You don't send the invoice. Now there's emotion from the other side and things don't look good for them. Now all of a sudden those 4 hours seem like duds, right? Like that, I don't know. Why should I pay for
Didn't
those
add
four
up to
hours? We
anything
just
good,
had a
right?
setback
Yeah,
in the case. It's all
that's
your
right.
fault, right? I
Yeah,
think it's more than just remembering. It's also you're leaving opportunity for things to happen where how they view you and your relationship with them and their willingness to pay the invoice is directly tied to what happens afterwards. So why would you want to wait? Why would you want to hold on to that and then I mean, it could work out in your favor. It could be something really good happens and they feel even better about paying it, but it
right.
could also be the other way around.
Yeah, I
So
think you can game that a little bit though, right? And just be smart about it. And so have your system where you're, by default, you're billing more regularly. Sticker shock is real. It's one of the number one reasons that clients don't pay. It's not that they're malicious, they're bad. It's a lot of money and it happened real quick, or real quick in the sense of a month flies by really fast. But their proximity to the activities and the data and the feeling of work being done as a business owner, this happens with contractors all the time, right? If they're kind of out of sight, out of mind, and I just get the bill, I do sort of how's that investment working out for me? Right? It just happens, right? It's human nature. And the further away they are too, I'm not saying go to your client's house and work on the case at their kitchen table, right? But again, when again, it's unfortunate. I see this with remote employees too. It can be really hard to manage remote employees. It's the same thing when it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and I don't know what it is. We're all just, pessimists. No, not really, but like there's sort of a little bit more scrutiny on the things I can't see and touch and feel and really experience regularly. So I think it's if firms are billing on a monthly basis, I shoot for biweekly, like let's drag them a little bit closer. I'm in no way opposed to what you said about weekly if it's appropriate for that firm. And then something you said too, like if that is a huge overhead, right? It's a burden. You can't do it. I can't possibly, I don't have the time, or maybe it's I don't want to use my time that way. That's okay too.
right.
That is an answer, right? Get someone who can, like a big running a business, right, is just about running a law firm is running a business, first of all, right? Let's remind ourselves of that. And then I think running a business is about putting the right people in the right positions. I have certain strengths and I have lots of weaknesses, right? Marketing, for example, I love talking. We're up here. I could do 100 of these, right? I know you could do the same. It's one of those things. But when it's like, let's go write out the marketing copy for a month, sometimes I get pulled into that stuff. My brain just goes mashed potatoes. I don't want to do that, right? I want to talk to people. I want to engage with clients. And so I get excited about those sorts of things. I shouldn't be the one responsible for that. Now, in a small business, sometimes you just are, okay? But you got to yourself up and get out of that. So find yourself a great accounting firm. I partner with a ton of these folks, accounting and bookkeeping firms. There are so many that niche down into legal. They know your business. I'm a big proponent of finding someone who understands your business. IOLTA compliance, three-way reconciliation, trust compliance. Like, find someone who understands. Don't ask your neighbor's cousin's sister to do your books. I'm sorry, but a lot of people still think that way. Well, it's just books. It's a pretty complicated process, certainly it's been around a long time, but when you talk about law, get the right person. It's not that expensive when you consider your time. And what I love about working with attorneys too is most attorneys have an hourly rate. They know what their time is worth. You all need to be, that's a formula for like, is it cost more than this amount per hour to do this thing? Okay, then I'm saving money if I do it, right? But if it's anything lower, and it almost always is, then I'm losing money by doing it, right?
Yeah, so I love what you're sharing, and honestly, like we just spent a lot of time talking about this realization.
Yeah.
Uh, what is it? The
Lockup.
realization
Yeah. Get the bill
lockup,
out the
right?
door. Realization lockup.
Realization lockup. I got to practice that. What is the other part of that?
Yeah, so collections lockup,
Collections lockup, right?
definitely my world, right? So it's really that once we've issued the bills, what is the amount of time, how many days does it take for me to get paid? And then that same Clio report, the median there was 45 days. So longer than the realization lockup, even still, so that compounds. And then as you said, I think it was 97. There's kind of like there's something there in the middle, right? I think the combination of all of it was well over 90 days. So collections lockup specifically though is we've got the bill out the door. How long is it going to take? So if the median firm is 45 days, your rent, your payroll, your expenses all function on either a 30 or 15-day cycle for the most case, right? So why are we abiding getting paid on a 45-day cycle or worse, right? That's the median. So that means there's a lot of firms that are way worse off than that, right? So I think we're setting ourselves up to be bleeding out on cash flow, right? And that is the death knell, as you put it, Moshe, of a law firm, right? I run out of any business. I ran out of cash. It's like running out of blood. It's not good for the machine, right?
Right. It's more right. It's more than just running out of cash, right? Like if you want to grow, if you want to, I mean, let's just say you're a solo, you're trying to get to 1 million, or you're at 1 million trying to get to two, or you're at two, you're trying to get to three, whatever the next stage of growth for you is, it's going to require an investment of capital to get there.
That's right.
Why do you need to make it harder on yourself by also needing to fund 90 days of operations as part of that process? Right? Because essentially that's what we're saying is like, okay, we're gonna invest our capital in operating this firm for 90 days to then get paid for the work that happened 90 days ago. Now, firms that are contingency based, that's your business model, okay? But firms that are hourly based or even flat fee based, that's not your business model. What you're trying to create is a situation where you get paid instantaneously for the work you're doing. But yet the systems that we set up behind it are setting you up for a 90-day pay cycle. And anybody who's taken an accounting class knows that anything more than 30 days past due is a bad idea, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, the bottom line is that if you solve this, if you can get it from 90 to 30, you bought yourself 60 days, which might be enough capital for that next marketing campaign. It might be enough capital for that next the next attorney hire that you're going to hire, or the next paralegal, or whatever it is, right? Like you can solve your next growth problem by solving this problem. And that's why I really want people to change the way they think about this. I'm not just solving a cash flow issue. I'm actually solving the growth equation. I'm actually solving the next step in my law firm's growth. So we talked about I mean, shortening the realizations lockup period is really just a function of the process that you're using to bill your clients. Bill
Right.
them faster, bill them quicker. You're going to shorten that cycle. Okay.
That's right.
How do what are the best practices that a law firm should put in place for the collection side of it to shorten the collection lockup? What can we do to make that happen faster?
Yeah, I think just like in the realization side, there's tooling. That's one piece, right? We're using something like we were talking about Clio's report. Let's, throw them a bone, like using a practice management solution, right? Tracking your time, issuing your bills. We need to be using technology, right? That's going to obviously help get the bill out the door faster. But then there are great tools. This is something we built into Collbox, right? Like we kind of have our flavor of email reminders and follow-ups. Whether you're doing a trust replenishment request or a true past due bill follow-up, it's kind of the same motion, right? We need to be using technology on that. What that needs to be married to, though, is a cadence. So accounts receivable for time immemorial, just like I said, it functions on sort of a kind of a 0 to 30, 30 to 60, 60 to 90, 90 plus, and these sorts of things, 120 plus. Older is bad, we know that. Everyone instinctively gets that. But what we're seeing is invoices lose an average of 12 to 15% of their value for every 30 days that they remain outstanding. So quite literally your money is wasting away, right? This isn't wine. This is not even just a high yield savings account. It's nothing. You're just losing money, right? You're actually losing it at a pretty brisk clip. Um, so we need to have a cadence, and it needs to be, it's not rocket science. I do classes on this all the time. On day, ignoring all the prep in the before, right? Just for a second. But when we literally hit day one past due, what are we going to do? Right? We need to send an email reminder, probably, right? Most people just need a nudge. It's not intentional. They might be playing a little bit of a cash flow game, but they probably just need a little kick in the butt. I always use this phrasing of friendly, consistent, persistent, and it's the last piece that I see law firms really struggle with because that's the human nature piece. And it's not that, you mentioned earlier, is it human nature that people just don't pay? I think it's people first in line, first to get paid is how I like to do it. It's another little catchphrase I love because when it comes time to pay my rent, my bills, my mortgage, like I have a mental priority list. A lot of stuff's on auto pay, to your point earlier, so I don't have to think about it. So make it easy for them to pay. But I also know of the things that aren't on auto pay, which ones have the highest consequence, right? Like, or who's going to call me and kind of make me feel bad about it a little bit. And I don't mean they're unprofessional, but they're going to stay on top of it. Like we've got a vendor that I don't have an easy way to auto pay them, but I'm like, all right, it's on my calendar, I'll do it. The email right away though. So I'm like, okay, I'm always there. They hit me on day three past due every single time, right? They have a certain way that they do it. So I think a cadence of reminders, which technology can help with, but we all delete emails we don't want to read sometimes. Something that might surprise people, but like what we've seen a huge improvement on is just picking up the phone, right? Hi, this is Matt. Ideally not the attorney, right? Again, be guard your time very, very closely. But hi, this is Matt. I'm calling on, from ABC Law. Just checking in on invoice 123. Did you get that? Did you have any questions or anything I can help with? Make it a customer service phone call. Don't make it a collections phone call. Obviously, you have your goal in mind. I just wanted to make sure you got it. Do the assumptive sort of thing. Oh, you probably didn't get that. I want to make sure you had access to it. Did that show up okay in your inbox? We're just making sure. Like you could do all kinds of little things that are very friendly, they're not aggressive. And I just want to make sure you're feeling good. Do you have any questions about that invoice? I'm here to help you. All these sorts of things. And then you just literally layer those emails, phone calls, resending the bill just kind of automatically, like pretending that they didn't get it, right? Resending the email reminders should do a fair amount of that. And that's kind of your 0 to 30, 0 to no, really no longer than that sort of phase of like gentle reminders, first couple weeks, these sorts of things. But if we're really not getting anywhere, it's all about escalation after that. And I have a cadence that we publish and kind of what we do at Callbox. And because the thing is, giving it away is easy for me because I didn't create anything brand new for Callbox. We just started doing it for people, right? Like that's the difference, right? And unfortunately, I think attorneys here or employers, I just want to say anyone who's managing the folks that are tasked with making these phone calls, most people do not want to make these phone calls. Like they will not do it regularly. So you're going to have to be very careful, right? So just You write out your cadence, you download it from me, whatever you want to do, right? Have a cadence, just have an AR policy. Here's what we're going to do on day 1, 10, 15, so on and so on. And just make sure that's where the management comes in, right? So you got to make sure that they're making the phone calls. And I hate to say it, but it's made all the difference because you get email reminders from a Clio or a practice management solution, yet our collections lockup numbers are still there. That's not any shade on them or any others out there, but I think it's just people not following through on it. So I think getting the bill out the door is certainly a piece of it. But for collections lockup, I think you got to just pick up the phone. You got to be willing to have that conversation, and then we get into some interesting things that you and I were talking on before we kicked off. Um, what's going on, right? Like having that real conversation with the client. Family law, I'm talking to you. I work with a ton of family law, so I bring that up a lot. Are they in financial hardship? This could be for any practice area, whether it's the business or an individual. Do they need a payment plan? Do they need a discount? These kinds of things. You don't ever want to lead with any of these things. You want cash flow and profit first. That's not a question. But, you know, the reality is if you frame it to a client like it's all or nothing, a client in true hardship is going to choose nothing, right? They're just going to they're going to roll the dice on not paying you. And becomes a bluffing game on who's more serious, right?
Right.
And unfortunately, law firms back down most of the time, right? That needs to change also. And so that's when you can unpack things. You can say, all right, you owe $5,000, case is over. I want to set you up on an installment plan, right? But you need to pay X amount every month. I need a credit card on file. There's great tooling for this inside the practice management systems, right? Like, let's set those things up. Let's use those tools. But that's a policy this conversation you need to have, right? Inside my firm, what am I comfortable with? There's a family law group out of Colorado. I love, they're great partners of ours. They're like, we're breaking it up into 6 installments. That is the most I'm willing to be a bank to anybody. They've set it up, they've thought it through, they've done the math, they know their numbers, and they know that 6 months, 6 equal installments is something that they can tolerate. And it brings in enough business with that flexibility. It gives them a little more edge. They're happy to do it, but we help them execute on it, right? Someone has to keep calling and make sure, because even if you put a credit card on file, declined, insufficient funds. Well, now we're back to AR again, right? So we have to pick up the phone, we have to follow up, and we need to have the follow up. Are we ever going to use collection agencies? Are we going to report on their credit? A lot of these things are like cure way down the line where prevention is ideal. But that's something I consult a lot of firms on, is because nobody talks to me usually when things are beautiful in their cash
Right.
flow and accounts receivable world. So, we talk a lot about like, all right, well, are you going to sue them? No? Okay, probably not. What about collections? What about payment plans? What about a settlement, right? Are we willing to take 50 or 75% of this to call this thing done? These are all tools. None of these should be your first line of defense, but I think these things all need to be defined and very clearly. That way, when you hire a staff member, your will be done, right? Like, let's just get this thing executed. You've thought it through as the business owner. What can I tolerate, to stay in line with my financial goals? And that's all it is.
Yeah, and I think when you start to think about the decreasing value of the invoice, it makes you understand like where's my wiggle room, right? Like if I could get them to pay it in full now, what's the value for me in that? Well, if they don't pay it in full now, then it's going to decrease in value by 15% come next week, right? So why don't I just offer them 85% and call it a day, and and let them walk away. So I might have a conversation that says, look, I understand that things come up and blah blah blah, um do you think that if I was able to shave X amount of dollars off of this invoice, you can come up with the total today? And
Right.
if the answer is no, then okay, then we're not going to go down that road. But
Or
if
what
the
do you
answer is yes,
propose,
then okay,
right? Yeah.
let's see if we can make that happen. Let me see if I can get approval for that. Let me put you on hold, right? Like, and always make it like
Oh yeah.
it wasn't my decision to
Not
make.
running up the ladder. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Well,
Exactly.
and you come with a solution, right? Which is already well within your comfort zone. Because if you wait and you're like, all right, what can you do? I mean, I've had firms tell me, oh, he's paying $50 a month. I'm like, okay, what's the balance? $10,000. I'm like, aha, like that's
So you
infinite.
basically just gave him a 20-year sentence.
Yeah, basically, right? You're like, okay, well, and they're not happy, but like again, they put themselves in a corner and they say, well, what can you do, right? So you got to come with a solution, make it fair, fair to both sides. Ideally, of course, you're thinking about your firm, but you have to come in with like, what can I tolerate? What do I anticipate my client's going to go for? It's kind of a sales game, right? Like, is my price I'm putting out there initially going to work? Prepayment discounts are interesting too, but and they're much smaller. They need to be a lot smaller. But if we get into that, like early payment discounts, right? Prepayment or early payment discounts. Hey, we're coming up on this. Normally wouldn't charge you here. If you do this, you save 2%, 5%. Everybody loves a discount. The other thing I'll say on the flip side of that spectrum, if we go so long that we're starting to have the, I jokingly say Collbox is collections with a lowercase c, right? That's my little cute line. But if we're going capital C, we're talking collection agencies, right? We're going to go look at credit reporting if it's consumers, right? Or we're going to go find a commercial collection agency. The minimum that a consumer collection agency that I've seen and worked with, and I've worked with these folks for a decade, is 35%, usually more like 45 or 50% sometimes, sometimes higher than that. It's based on age, but amounts and things like that. That goes back to what you said, time value of money. Well, if I know I'm going to have to, send somebody to collections, well, and I know they're going to take 40%, why wouldn't I offer a 20% settlement or discount before it gets to that state? I've literally saved myself 20%, right? Another thing at the end of your, I like to put things on.
I would even
Yeah,
argue giving the full 40% is still
sure.
worthwhile because you're not dragging them through the mud to get it. Like
Absolutely.
there is something to be said about getting to a solution where everybody's walking away content. I don't know if happy is the right word,
Right.
but feeling like, okay, this is settled and I feel good about it and we feel good about what we got.
Mhm.
You're gonna collect, you're gonna get that 40% off anyway when you go to collections, but now your client's gonna be having their credit flagged. They're going to be dealing with a agency that's going to be hounding them.
That's
It
right.
is not going to leave a good taste in their mouth about your law firm.
That's
So even if you're not saving money, you're offering them less than what the collection agency would give you. I feel like there's a ton of value in even just matching it, or even taking a little bit less than you would get from them,
Well, you can go
from
a
that
couple
perspective.
ways. Look at it this way. Everything you just said, I agree with. And so if we send them to collections, then there's a higher risk of a bar complaint or at minimum a bad review, right? On Google or
Right.
Yelp, wherever you like to do your reviews. Flip it the other way around. You can leverage that. Hey, look, I see things are hard for you. You know what would really help me out? I'm going to do this for you. Can you go leave me a good, go leave a review? Like you're again leaving them with that good taste, that contentment. They're like, wow, this is really great. Now, can you refer me a few other clients, or something? You got to be careful with that because if they're the certain kind of client who's stiff to you or maybe made your life really hard, you may not want more from that source. But that is a thing that you can do, right? I do this in sort of a way when firms are like, oh, I don't know about the price, with Callbox or something like that. Well, like bring a friend, I'll give you both a big discount. These kinds of things, like it can really work in a few different ways. It's your business, right? There are legal rules, obviously you got to stay within the bounds of, but for pricing and the way you do these things, like get creative because you could literally turn a situation like you just described, Moshe, from I'm going to go file a bar complaint, even though if it may be unfounded, you'll be fine. You'll come out of it okay, but not after more stress and time and lost opportunity. You might end up with a 5-star review, so just think about it as a marketing expense in some ways, right? Like to some degree, like you wouldn't pay for these reviews, but like if you're going to help somebody out anyway, say, hey, well, maybe you can help me, or maybe there's a way you can help spread the word. I'm a small business owner myself, trying to do good things here, right? You can turn that into a really positive thing. To summarize a little bit, though, I think, defining the policy and just having some obvious next steps, right? At certain days, I'm going to do my email reminders. That should be automated, right? Um, I'm going to layer in phone calls. I'm going to know my leverage points. That's what will vary by practice area so much. When am I going to file a motion to withdraw, right? In some practice areas, like going kind of putting the call box hat on, we'll chase it for 90 days for the firm. Like we'll do the calls, the emails, the reminders, all that stuff. Others like family law are like, no, I want to I'm out by 45. I'm filing a motion to withdraw if they haven't cured, like there's all this stuff they're on top of a lot more quickly. Those are the firms I see that have, seen massive improvements in their cash flow. They're really evaluating every step of their cases, with or without someone like a call box, right? Is just knowing what your workflow, how money flows through your firm, how do your cases typically go, and then layering in, appropriate action items But I just one big slide I'm kind of looking off screen here is like, do not skimp on the friendly phone calls because you can make that a customer service check-in more than a collections call, though it even really is just a kind of a collections check-in. Um, you have to do it, but so many firms refuse to do that last piece. And I think it comes from like the attorney should never be doing it. Your time is far too valuable. Office managers have a thousand other things to be doing, and it's not their favorite thing to do, right? So classic human psychology. If my to-do list is this long, and collection calls are down here, oh, conveniently, there's this other thing I have to do, and it just keeps pushing down the collections calls, right? Infinitely. And that's where I see, when people on board with us, I ask like, all right, who's in charge of it right now? How is that going? Tell me what you've been doing. Well, we get the bills out the door, pretty well. No problems there, or feeling pretty good. All right, what's our past due? Well, we do the email reminders in blank practice management solution. Okay, and then what? What do you mean? And so it is obvious to me where the fall off is in the phone calls, which is why we invested in that on the callbox side. But you can do it yourself. That's something I tell everyone on every consult. Like, there's no dark magic here. It's just rolling up your sleeves and doing the needful. But unfortunately, the needful kind of stinks, right? Like it's
Right.
not
Well,
fun.
and
Right?
honestly, like doing it yourself, the real way to be successful at it is the consistency involved, right?
Exactly right.
And often when we say we're going to do something ourselves, we're capable of doing it, but we lack that consistency because just like your customer who's prioritizing their rent over paying you, you're going to prioritize serving a current client, a paying client, over going after somebody who you've already served and collecting the money,
Because
which
it feels better, right?
is
And yeah, I'm getting results from my
and
work.
you
Yeah,
also feel like you feel like I can always go after and try to collect that money, but this client needs to be served right now, right?
that's right.
So
It'll always be there to chase later is a huge fallacy, right? That we all tell ourselves when you
correct.
couple it with the stats, right? Of like actually the actual value of the money. Yeah.
Correct. And honestly, I think it's more important for you to chase after money you're already owed than to serve somebody to generate new. It's almost like I had my landscaper tell me this yesterday. I was like, I'm gonna use this on the podcast tomorrow. I know I'm gonna, and here it is. He says it's easier to keep a customer than to find a new one,
That's
right?
I think that's spelled out in
And
tons of studies, and they expense to replace, and yeah.
I mean, we spend so much time, effort, and money chasing after new leads, new clients, but you got to serve the clients you have. You got to get them to the finish line where they're happy and satisfied and willing and wanting to refer you business and wanting to do business with you again because you spent so much money to bring them in the door. Why would you want to just discard them as trash at the end? And that's what firms are doing is like, okay, I get to this point where they're not paying me, so I'm just going to write them off. But if you had a conversation with them, if you had done a better job in your billing practices, if you had done a better job in collection practices, you would have never got here. It's almost like so much of the collection process is fixing your own mistakes. We
Sometimes
blame it on the client. We blame it on oh, they're not paying it. But 90% of the time, it's because you failed to do your job as a service provider in the first place. I don't mean providing the service you were hired for. I mean sending a timely invoice, detailed, answering any questions they had about it, getting them to pay it, talking to them about paying it, having those conversations. If that didn't happen, then whose fault is it that 90 days later they're refusing to pay this invoice?
early in our career here at Callbox, we had like a total WordPress theme website, just like, oh, it's the template, like the most basic thing you could have. And we were like, oh, we have a designer in our network. We're gonna have him do it. And we scoped it out. He kind of said flat fee even. He said it's gonna be 6 grand. I'm gonna do all this stuff. And we were like, that sounds great. Let's do it. And he did all the work and he launched the website. And we were like, wow, this is beautiful. Like made some tweaks. Like we were even very happy with what it was. Awesome. Did not hear from that person for 6 months from an invoice perspective. Like I think maybe even asked a couple times ourselves, like we're like, hey, did you want to
Do
get
you want to
paid?
get paid for this?
Like we're asking you, but like, hey, we're a small business. Like we've got cash flow. Like we're trying to be tight over here. Like it's better these days, but like every business functions that way. If getting paid is not your priority, then why should you getting paid be my priority, right? And so
Right.
I think, I coach a lot of firms on this too, is the regular follow-ups, they need to be friendly. You're not being aggressive. That's not the point, and you shouldn't be doing that, actually. Kill them with kindness, as we say, right? Like regularly follow up, very friendly, but very persistently, and it creates a culture of that you have an expectation to be paid for your work. It goes unsaid almost, right? Yes, you're asking, you're doing check-ins and things like that, but it's like I said, there are those that follow up on like a routine basis, and I know it. I hate to say this, I probably shouldn't say this on a recording, but you can air it. It's like in this journey, I've played with a couple vendors and like not paid here for a second just to see what they would do. Like we're the AR guys, right? I'm like, I wonder what's going to happen. Not for very long. I'm not, not maliciously trying to string anybody out, but it's like some people never followed up. And I'm like, hey, okay, let me pay that. Also, by the way, did you know? I would reach out to them. Like, did you know I didn't do this and you didn't follow up at all? Others were like clockwork. And it was like, boom, day one past due. We want to let you know that this. I was like, ooh, they're on it. And
I
most
had
businesses are not on it.
I had a house that we rented, right? So we lived in the house, we moved to another house, we decided to keep it as a rental property, put renters in there. First
Yeah.
month, 3 days late on rent. I
Oh,
knew
I'm
I was
sorry.
like, if I let this slide, this is going to be the norm. And I basically blasted them, even though by legal documentation, right, they had a 10-day grace period, right? Like they could pay it 10 days late, and I can't do anything about it.
Right.
But I told them, I said, look, we're gonna have the best relationship ever. Like you're good, you have a problem, we're gonna take care of the problem. You want us to fix something, we're gonna fix it. But there's a two-way street. I expect the rent to be paid on time. That means that
Okay.
when it's due on the first, we're already paid. And after that, like clockwork, they paid on time. And if they weren't gonna make it by the first, that we got a message saying, hey, sorry, we're gonna be 2 days late for whatever. So it's almost like setting the expectation creates that, like it sets up the relationship in a different way where they know that the expectation is that they're going to be paying on time. But if you don't do that, if you fail at that from the get-go, you're setting the stage for trouble down the road because you've sent the signal that it's okay.
That's right. People fill in that void very quickly. On like if you don't set sort of order and a regimented sort of process. I'm a lifelong kind of sales guy. I've always been in biz dev or sales roles right out of college. Didn't mean to get there. Don't know. Just like talking a lot, I guess. You just naturally end up in a certain way. And so I harken back to some trainings I received, and a lot of the stuff I've been through over the last 20 years. And it's like, well, early expectations. So when you talk about churn in our world, right? Somebody cancels, doesn't renew, right? It's just a customer who doesn't offer repeat business, right? In certain practice areas, that's not going to make all that much sense. But why did they do that? We analyzed the heck out of this at Callbox, right? Why aren't they renewing? Especially over in the early years of doing this. A lot of times the expectations weren't set that well, right? Of like exactly what we were going to do and how it worked and what the outcomes were. And that comes to your messaging. So your intake, literally is your sales process, right? A lot of law firms don't speak in those terms, but it is your sales process. Whoever your intake specialist is, I believe, if you depending on paid consults versus free consults and booking those and things like that, they're not unlike booking a sales demo for you guys, right? You can read a lot of interesting literature from like kind of the broader business world and apply those learnings to your firms. But I think setting clear expectations on price, right? It can be really, really hard for attorneys. You guys get really squirrely. I don't know what the cost could be. It depends. Go look at the data. You have the data, right? You have years and years of data in your practice management systems now. Most people do. Go run some analysis on it and see what the average cost was for this type of case with this type of caveat. I know contested versus uncontested, anything, divorce, probate, whatever. It gets weird. It definitely has some wide range, but setting clear cost expectations as best as you can and constantly focusing on improving on that. If I went into Best Buy and they told me that that TV might cost 10 grand or it might cost $500, I'm not buying the TV, right? Or I'm going to have a real hard time, and I
Right.
know that's not fair in many ways to the attorneys, but you wouldn't as a consumer behave that way, right? You just couldn't tolerate that from almost any other business out there, which is why flat rate is so interesting. And again, I know our world's a little different. I'm a proponent where you can. But I think the real work, the rubber meets the road of like, can people really give you 20 grand up front for a retainer? And are you willing to turn down all that business? If you are in a position to do that, you're in a high-end market, you should do it. Take the money and like get paid up front 100% of the time. For others where you're serving consumers and there's segments, there are other smart ways though, and that's where all this layering gets really important of like setting the expectation, what reasonable cost expectations there too, how and when, and literally what payment method you're going to use to pay, and like at what frequency. Like it's bothersome and cumbersome, but these are the things, right? And everything you get right will have a downstream effect actually to either reduce your need for somebody like a call box, or make sure that we're in there to just keep it clean. Whoever your staff is, your office manager, whoever's making the calls, it's going to go smoother when all these other boxes are checked, right?
Yeah, I would argue that you gotta do the math and run the numbers, because to you know to say that a lot of people will say no to that $20,000 retainer, that might be the case. But how many of those people are not paying the $20,000, right? So would I rather do the work and not get paid, or would I rather do less work and get paid for it? I'd rather do less work and get paid for it. So it really depends on like, okay, how many clients are going to say no, I can't do that and not move forward, versus and the rest I get paid for 100%, or there's a certain amount that are gonna not pay, and what's that percentage? What percentage gets paid, and then how much work am I doing to generate this revenue?
Hmm.
I am willing to bet that when we really crunch the numbers, most firms will be much better off saying no to the clients who cannot come up with the $20,000,
Yeah.
and just keeping the ones who can. Nothing to do with a high end market, but simply because you're going to do a lot less work and get paid for the work you're doing and the value you're providing, and you're gonna be a much happier attorney. You're gonna have much happier attorneys on your staff. You're going to attract a much better client. Like, it
Well, that's the
just by
avatar
setting
for
that
sure, right?
policy, it's gonna
Yeah.
create the vacuum for those types of clients to come in. And there's another piece of this. If somebody knew up front that it was going to be $20,000, they might have decided not to argue some of these fine points, right? Like, some of these people are
Mhm.
going into a contested divorce for the stupidest things.
Yeah.
And if they truly understood that I have to come up with $20,000 to actually get, you know, it's going to cost me $20,000 to get this $5,000 car I'm trying to get out of this person, right? Like,
You can keep the
that
dog.
doesn't that
No, I'm
doesn't
just
make
kidding.
sense,
But
right?
no, yeah.
No,
No,
but
I
that's
think you're exactly right. That's
but
exactly
yeah,
right.
so sometimes it's custody issues or whatever. But honestly, like, if you had to come up with $20,000, or you have to find a medium that you can work with, so much of this is driven by emotion. But when it comes down to the brass tacks of, hey, I'm not going to represent you if you
Mhm.
don't have this money, and you don't have this money, you're going to be forced to possibly make a different decision. And
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a bad one. Probably in mediation, we got to a pretty good decision, but you want it all, right?
Yeah. That's right.
So I think that a lot of these situations, you're really helping your client actually make the right decision to begin with, right? Like, by sticking to your guns. So I do think that there's an opportunity, and also with flat fee, right? Let's stick to family law, which you know very well. The beginning part of a divorce process is the same for everybody. Nobody starts off the divorce process knowing that they're going to end up in court for 6 months, right? We're all hoping that we're going to file for divorce, and we're going to be two mature adults who are going to come to an agreement. Maybe it's in mediation, maybe it's not, but there are phases that you go through. And the first phase is, let's just draft this up, let's serve the other party, let's get started. Then the next phase is, okay, let's go through a mediation process or whatever, process to try to actually come to an agreement without needing to go to court. Then, if it's still contested, we're going to end up duking it out in court, right? You can flat fee that whole beginning. You can
Yeah.
break it up into stages, and you can say, hey, for the first part of the process, it's $4,000. And when we get to this juncture, this part, the mediation, that's $8,000. Then, if we can't come to an agreement and you have to go to court, it's a $20,000 retainer, and I charge $450 an hour. You can piecemeal it that way, but you set the
Sure.
stage for them to be fully aware of what they're signing up for, but also knowing that there is an exit at every one of these stops. You're on a highway and you can get off,
Yeah,
right?
I think that's right. And then you build in the process right along the way. If you are going to either upfront throughout the whole process or later stage post some flat fee sort of options, you just still have to have your policy in place, right? Of like, how am I going to follow up and what am I going to do? I know it's all like the kind of the boring parts of business. Writing it down also is not as hard as executing on it, right? So
Right.
that's the hard part, like it because it feels so good to have that document, especially if you're more like, yeah, we documented the hell out of that thing. We know exactly what we're going to do, but then the rubber meets the road, right? We got people and processes and tools. So I think step one is documenting it. And then two, is just constant evaluation. Like, where can I reduce my risk? I think is really what you're saying, right? If I can flat fee this piece and that piece, I'm going to reduce my risk throughout the whole process. I might even ward off some of those riskier things. Or if they are going to come in, they know that I have some upside financially, which is not all bad, right? I'm entertaining this type of work because I do have financial upside, but I've set really clear boundaries and expectations and everything else we've been talking about. So, yeah, I think and you got to find what type of firm you want to run, right? Do you want a giant firm where we take on all this and we max out billable hours and we have like I want to run a gigantic firm, or do I want to be a solo who travels the world and like works from my laptop? Like that's an option too, right? And that's something, I know there's all types of folks listening right now, but you can't answer that for you. But I think along the way, no matter what, maybe even more so if you want to be small and really flexible, you have to be armed to the teeth with like tooling and processes and automation. And as much I say this with sort of a caveat, like outsourcing, reliable, trustworthy outsourcing as you can, to take off the burdensome things that are not revenue generating, right? Like do what you can do, and everything else that's lower than your hourly rate, probably need to be putting someone or something in place to take that off of your plate.
Yeah. Look, I think the key to success in business is to always be asking the question who, not how. I know it's the title of a book and it sounds cliche, but the reality is that the less that you do personally, the more successful you're going to be. And it doesn't always have to be, oh, I need to hire somebody for this, right?
Right.
Like Collbox.co, you're going to talk about it in a moment. It's a service that does the collections for you. They have professionals who are trained for this. Like it's so easy and it costs just a few $100s a month. Like it's a no-brainer to just be like, hey, let me engage them instead of thinking, oh, I need to hire somebody who's going to be doing my collections for me. And so now I'm thinking of either an international VA or a full-time stateside person. So I'm talking about a $50,000 salary. That's not what we're talking about. Even if you're a multi-million dollar firm listening to this, right? And you do have somebody in your office who is tasked with this, right? Are they really the best person for the job? Is that really the best use of their time? Should they be busy with this? And even if they should, are they doing it consistently? Are they really moving the needle in the AR the way that they need? Or would you be better off handing it off to somebody who that's what they do for a living? That's what they do all day. So, and I was intentional with our entire conversation being all informational. Really, it's not um, it's not something that we want to specifically kind of like push you to use a vendor when we're interviewing them, but I love what Matt's company does. I think that I think there's so many reasons to have this outsourced to somebody that's not in-house for you. Um, and Matt, let's talk about that real quick. And the link I'm going to provide for everybody just to make it really easy. Because of the spelling of everything, go to profitwithlaw.com/CB for Qualbox. Profitwithlaw.com/CB. My team will make a redirect that'll take you straight over to callbox.co. And you can check it out. But Matt, we're closing out the show. We're out of time. We're actually over time. Folks, thanks for sticking it out with us for a bit of a longer episode, but I think there was so much good stuff we covered today. I mean, really incredible stuff. Matt, last parting piece of advice or wisdom for everybody, and then tell us, what they need to know about Callbox. What does it do? And anything that you need to share about them getting started.
Sure, sure. Yeah. I think for parting wisdom, it's I close all of these classes that I do with this. It's not rocket science. There are a lot of wins to be had here without spending any money, right? But just taking the time, and you need to do this anyways, whether you engage with Callbox or not, and just really understand how money and work flows through your system, right? Like through your firm. But it's, success in accounts receivable and cash flow. I think it just comes down to having a clear policy, a clear workflow to execute that policy, right? It's got to be specialized to your firm and your practice area, of course. You're going to tweak that. But running it, and you called this out earlier, Moshe, is just consistently and with persistence. That is, if you could just keep doing that consistently and persistently, you will see huge increases on that, right? And so, to kind of tie it off with Callbox, like what we do, and I kind of sort of too much self-deprecating humor in my life, I guess, but like you can do what we do, right? This is not some like, patented thing you can only do with us. Look, we're just doing a thing that's not fun. It's essential to your business. And we hire people who are trained for that. So we have our automations, email reminders, resending of the bills and things like that. We can do some trust replenishment requests in most cases. We do a lot of that stuff as well, but we just hire people who, Moshe, you called this out. They go for about 50, 60 grand a year, well trained in AR, and we fractionalize them, right, for law firms. So they're trained in that, specific to that, and then they pick up the phone and they do the persistence, right? And it makes all the difference in the world. So we're tracking an average improvement to cash flow or reduction to that collections lockup stat we talked about of 40%. So getting paid an average of 40% faster with us. And I wish I could claim it was all the bells and whistles and the tech, not to demean our product team. They do amazing things too, but it's picking up the phone. It's the persistence. You can do it, but if you don't want to do it, or you just don't feel like you have the time, you're too small of a team, which is who we serve, right? To get into like firms size, I'd say you're 15 people or less, right? Um, you know, usually a couple of attorneys, one to two, maybe some paralegals in there. You're small to mid-sized firm, right? That's going to be our ideal sweet spot. Um, and then we bill based on how many clients you bill in a typical month. So we're going to put you on a plan that's based on your size of firm, that's fair for you. You keep 100%. We don't touch the money. We'll use your existing payment methods, whether that's law pay or check or ACH, all that good stuff. And then you can get up and running within about a week. So check us out. We'll integrate right with the practice management system. And as Moshe called out, on average, you're looking at 1/6 the cost of hiring somebody that's trained in AR. So a few $100. The average firm pays about $600 a month to us. So it's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things to just get this thing off your plate. And we're here if you need us. But also, and I don't know, you'll get, the great resource to go to our site. You can book a session with me too, and we can just talk shop. I'm as much business therapist as I am salesman for Callbox. I'm not a high pressure sales guy, but if you just want to talk through your AR workflow, I do a lot of webinars and classes and things like that too. So check me out on LinkedIn. And I'll usually have something coming up once a month where I give like a class or something like that. So happy to just be a resource to the community.
And we may put something together with Matt as well. I'm going to talk to him offline, see if we can do like a hands-on workshop to help you create your billing and collections process. And do that together. So I'm gonna work with him to try to make that happen for our listeners and those who are involved in our Profit with Law and Law Firm Growth Summit communities. And see if we can't bring that to market for you pretty quickly. So if my team made that happen by the time this recording gets aired, it'll be linked up in the show notes, and you can check it out there. But again, you can check out Collbox at profitwithlaw.com/CB for Collbox. Folks, this has been an incredible conversation. Really, so much that we covered. I encourage you to go back and listen to it again. Write down some notes about some ideas that came up and things that you can implement in your firm. Really, there's no excuse to not getting paid. There really is no excuse to not getting paid, and you've got to do everything in your power to make sure that you're getting paid, because if you don't get paid, what ends up happening is that you think you're charging 325 an hour when in reality you're collecting 225 an hour, right? And it's not you, it's the firm. And I can tell you that if you want to grow, or if you're already growing, you have attorneys on staff, then you can't have a highly profitable law firm unless you're billing at 400 bucks an hour or more, right? Like that's where your threshold needs to be. So if you haven't even figured out how to charge $400 an hour yet, and then on top of that, you're not even collecting it, you're really restricting your ability to grow, right? So that's really what I need you to think about is like, it's not just about the collections. It's also about what is the growth plan for my business and what is the profit margin I want, because you're not going to hit those numbers. The example I gave at the beginning of the episode, or somewhere in the fairly towards the beginning, about, a client that I had where it was a $2 million firm making $50,000. A $2 million firm who I work with should be making somewhere between $600,000 and $800,000 take home pay for the law firm owner after taxes. It's insane. Like, the drastic difference between that and 50,000 is massive. I mean, that's life changing. And you're not going to get there unless you figure out how to collect on every hour worked. Which means that we're not learning on the customer's dime. We're not discounting when they ask for it. We're getting bills out early, which is allowing us to have a much greater chance of being able to collect on it quickly, and then having a process to collect on it or disengage with a client if they're not going to pay. Nobody needs clients who are not going to pay. You don't need that in your business. You know, yes, I would say no to clients who cannot come up with the retainer necessary to make sure you're not getting screwed. That's the bottom line. And you're gonna have a much healthier business because of it. It's gonna take away a lot of the pains of growing it. Folks, we're here every Thursday with a brand new episode. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to hit the subscribe button. And in your podcast player, if you're watching us on YouTube, we appreciate it. Hit the subscribe button. This way you get notified every time we release a new video there. If you're not, check out our YouTube channel, profitwithlaw.com/YouTube, where we not only have our podcast, but we also we do a couple of things really cool on YouTube. Number one, we take snippets, like whole pieces of information from these episodes. So you don't have to watch an hour and 15 minutes, but you can just watch one of those shorts, and in 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 3 minutes, you get a dose of really cool information. And you can just come in there and just, grab a piece of info and move on with your day. Really help you think of new things and in growing your business. Second thing is I spent 2 days with a video team down in Miami, rented an Airbnb, made it really nice and beautiful. But basically, we spent 2 days binging. I mean, we recorded content for 2 days straight. We released all of that content from March of last year to March of this year. All of that is there on the YouTube channel, not on the podcast, available for you to watch. Go in there, check it out. Would love to have you as a viewer and a subscriber. Matt, so thank you so much for your time today. Folks, take care. Enjoy your weekend. We'll see you next week when we release a brand new episode here on the Profit Law Podcast. Appreciate you being here as a listener. Have a great day.